You know Aristotle as the father of logic, the architect of reason, the philosopher who shaped centuries of Western thought. But there's a part of his philosophy that has been buried, ignored, softened, or outright erased. A part he aimed specifically at men. He once warned, "Do not let your heart be ruled by a being governed by emotion and appearance." That being was woman. Yes, in ancient Greece, where men debated virtue and reason in marble halls, Aristotle dared to say it plainly. A man who gives his soul to the sway of female emotion loses the very essence of manhood, his reason. Now pause. Why haven't you heard this before? Why has this particular strand of Aristotle's teaching been filtered out of the modern classroom, the modern mind? The answer is uncomfortable because it threatens the illusion that modern love is always balanced, fair, and enlightened. It dares to suggest that if a man does not remain rooted in logic, he becomes vulnerable not because women are malicious, but because their nature is different, more emotional, more instinctive, more volatile. Aristotle didn't hate women, he understood them, but more importantly, he understood the danger of a man forgetting himself in the name of love, in the presence of charm, in the heat of beauty. And that is exactly what's happening today. Men, good men, intelligent men, are losing themselves, not in war, not in ideology, but in relationships that drain their strength while calling it romance. In this video, we will unearth what Aristotle truly said about female nature and why it matters now more than ever. We will reconnect you with a long-lost current of masculine wisdom, not to attack women, but to protect the clarity of your own mind. Because if you don't understand her nature, you won't understand what's happening to yours. To understand Aristotle's views on women, we must step out of the modern echo chamber and walk into the colonnades of ancient Athens, where logic was born, but emotion was still feared, where men sought clarity not in how they felt, but in how the world was. Aristotle was blunt, even for his time. He believed women were inherently more emotional, less capable of abstract reasoning, and naturally inclined toward the realm of the particular, the personal, the intimate, the reactive. In his own words, he described women as a deformed male, a crude translation. Yes, but what he meant was more precise, that women by nature lacked the rational completeness that in his philosophy defined virtue. To Aristotle, the ideal human was one who governed himself through logos, reason, order, structure. Man's highest good, eudaimonia, human flourishing, could only be achieved through rational alignment with virtue. But woman, in his view, was ruled more by pathos, emotion, instinct, fluctuation. He wasn't trying to be cruel, he was trying to be clear. And what he saw was this: when a man relinquishes his reason in the presence of unchecked emotion, he begins to decay morally, mentally, spiritually. Now you may hear this and think, this is outdated, misogynistic, archaic. But pause. Strip away the language of ancient patriarchy and look at the underlying principle through the lens of modern psychology. What Aristotle intuited thousands of years ago, Carl Jung confirmed in the 20th century. The psyche of man is not naturally emotional. His center of gravity lies in structure, function, direction. But when this masculine principle is thrown into disarray by unchecked anima, his unconscious idealization of the feminine, he dissolves into emotional chaos. Aristotle was not saying that women are evil. He was saying that if a man does not understand the emotional volatility of feminine nature, if he does not prepare his mind and spirit for it, he will be led not by truth but by sensation, not by judgment but by seduction. And this seduction need not be malicious. It can be gentle, loving, sweet, but still deeply dangerous if the man is not rooted in reason. He saw how men, in their desire to please or protect women, began to abandon their own rational principles. They would justify the irrational. excuse the inconsistent, sacrifice their own integrity to avoid confrontation with emotional storms. What begins as love, Aristotle warned, often ends in obedience. Now let's place this in historical context. In ancient Greece, the household, the oikos, was seen as a microcosm of the state. The man ruled not with cruelty, but with logos, with order, prudence, discipline. The woman, responsible for the inner world of the home, brought nurturing instinct, warmth, but also unpredictability, if not balanced by masculine reason. Aristotle feared that a man who surrendered his rational authority within the home would corrode the larger harmony of society itself. It's easy to reject this as outdated when viewed through the lens of modern gender equality. But consider this in a time when men are increasingly uncertain of their place, told to be soft, yet strong emotional, yet composed. How many have truly anchored themselves in something firm? How many relationships today are built not on reason and respect, but on emotional dependency, reactivity, and unspoken manipulation? How many men have abandoned their path to avoid the disapproval of a woman whose mood has become the moral compass of the relationship? Aristotle's warning is not about domination, it is about direction. He believed men must rule not over women, but over themselves. And only through this self-rule could they maintain their clarity when love became turbulent, when beauty became intoxicating, when affection threatened to become addiction. This is not an excuse to dismiss women. It is an invitation to understand them, and to do so without illusion. Because when you see feminine nature clearly, not with resentment, but with awareness, you are no longer a slave to your urges or to hers. You become what Aristotle believed a man should be, a citizen of virtue ruled by reason, guided by truth, and unmoved by chaos. He thinks he's in love. She's everything he ever wanted. Beautiful, affectionate, mysterious, and deeply emotional. She reacts with passion. She laughs loudly and cries suddenly. She pulls him close, then pushes him away. One moment she praises him as a hero, the next she says he doesn't listen, doesn't care, doesn't understand, and through it all he stays. Not because he's weak, but because he thinks that staying means he's strong. He doesn't realize it yet, but he's no longer in a relationship. He's in emotional captivity. This is what happens when a man doesn't understand the nature of the feminine, when he confuses emotion for truth, drama for depth, and surrender for love. Aristotle warned that the man who does not govern himself will be governed by others. In modern relationships, this governance often comes not through force, but through emotional currents, unspoken expectations, silent treatment, guilt, tears, and confusion, disguised as affection. The consequences of not understanding this dynamic are subtle and devastating. First, his logic erodes. He finds himself explaining away things he would never accept from anyone else. If a friend spoke to him the way she did, he'd walk. But because it comes wrapped in intimacy or tears or sex, he swallows it. He begins to believe that his discomfort is his fault, that her emotional reactions are always valid, and that his only role is to adapt. He loses trust in his instincts. He apologizes for truths he hasn't even spoken. He fears confrontation. He self-censors, not because he's kind, but because he's afraid of losing her emotional approval. And once a man begins to fear the emotions of a woman, he is no longer leading his life. He's reacting to hers. Then comes the loss of freedom. This doesn't happen overnight. It comes in quiet trades. He skips a gym session to avoid a fight. He cancels plans with friends to be there for her mood. He changes how he speaks, what he wears, what he wants, until one day he's a stranger to his own reflection. He tells himself he's compromising. But Aristotle would say, this is not virtue, this is surrender. Aristotle's ethics were rooted in balance, sophrosina, the temperate, measured life. He did not believe in giving yourself away to desire, no matter how intoxicating. And yet, this is precisely what many men do in the name of love. They give themselves away to someone else's chaos, believing it to be devotion. The third consequence is deeper, the erosion of identity. A man who gives up his clarity for affection slowly forgets who he is. He starts to identify with her opinion of him. If she's happy, he's good. If she's upset, he's failing. This emotional dependence is not love, it is bondage. And it's not always dramatic. Sometimes it's quiet, like a man who spends years in a relationship where he never leads, never questions, never asserts. He's not abused, he's just faded. His goals are on pause, his creativity has dimmed, his laughter feels rehearsed. And if you asked him what he wants from life, he'd hesitate, not because he doesn't know, but because he hasn't thought about himself in years. That's the final consequence. He no longer belongs to himself. The ancient Greeks believed the greatest human good was to live in accordance with reason. But how can you do that when your reason has been outsourced to someone else's approval? How can you flourish when your inner world has become a mirror of someone else's emotional weather? The truth is, many men don't even see this happening. Because modern culture encourages emotional submission in men, it tells them to just listen, to stop trying to fix things, to validate her feelings, and to be there. None of these are wrong in themselves. But without discernment, they become a philosophy of silencing yourself to maintain peace, of walking on eggshells while calling it love. Aristotle would say, this is not a virtuous man. It is a man out of balance, a man ruled not by reason but by emotion, and not even his own. And the longer he stays in that dynamic, the harder it is to escape. Because every time he gives in, he reinforces the pattern. Every time he rewards volatility with stability, he teaches her that chaos controls him. And worst of all, he forgets that love is not supposed to feel like fear. So what can we learn from this? That love without clarity is confusion. That emotion without structure is storm. That devotion without self-possession is self-destruction. This is not an argument against women or emotion or even passion. It is a call to reorder your house, to put logos before pathos, to put direction before desire. Because when a man leads with reason, he does not need to control. He only needs to remain rooted. And in that rooting, he becomes what Aristotle envisioned, a man of virtue, unshaken, intentional, and truly free. The man who has been lost in her emotion, in her beauty, in her chaos, he now finds himself standing in silence. And in that silence he hears something ancient rise within him. It is not rage, not heartbreak, but clarity. Aristotle called it logos, the governing principle of order, proportion, and reason. He believed that for man to live a truly good life, he must be ruled by reason, not moment-to-moment impulse, not pleasure, not approval, but rational discernment. This, he argued, is what separates man from animal and what distinguishes the virtuous man from the passive one. In matters of love, Aristotle was radical. He did not believe that love as commonly practiced leads to human flourishing, eudaimonia. Why? Because most love is rooted in desire, not reason. It is about getting attention, affection, validation. But love without the guidance of logos consumes rather than cultivates. He wrote extensively on phronesis, practical wisdom, the ability to make good decisions not in theory, but in the real messy, emotional terrain of daily life. A man may know what virtue is, but if he cannot apply it when a partner pushes his buttons, questions his worth, or tests his boundaries, he is not truly wise. Phronesis is the ability to hold fast to what is right, even when your emotions scream otherwise. When the woman you love is in turmoil, and everything in you wants to fix, to appease, to prove, phronesis tells you to remain rooted, not unfeeling but unmoved. Aristotle would say, don't run from emotion, but don't serve it either. Let it move through the relationship like wind through trees. Let it swirl, let it howl, but do not let it uproot you. He taught that love, if it is to last and elevate, must be led by virtue, not only by feeling, and virtue is always the offspring of reason. This is why he insisted that a man must train his mind much like a soldier trains his body, because love in the real world is not a soft meadow. It is a battlefield of needs, projections, and vulnerabilities. Without training, without philosophy, you react, you submit, you lose. But with logos, you see clearly. You recognize when your boundaries are being tested, not as betrayal, but as opportunity to stand firm. You recognize when affection is being weaponized, not with resentment, but with clarity. You recognize when your own desire is clouding your judgment and you choose discipline over indulgence. This is the power of reason. It gives you the ability to choose your response instead of being swept away by reaction. And this, Aristotle believed, is the mark of a true man. In a relationship, the man of reason doesn't dominate, but he also doesn't shrink. He doesn't control, but neither does he chase. He stays centered, clear, calm, not because he's cold, but because he knows if he loses his center, the entire structure collapses. You see, Aristotle didn't hate emotion. He simply refused to let it be the king. He saw emotion as a valuable servant, but a terrible master. Left unchecked, it turns love into dependency, passion into volatility, and connection into collapse. But when harnessed by reason, emotion becomes color to the form, music to the rhythm. It becomes part of a larger harmony, not the chaos that destroys it. This is what Aristotle offered men, not a cold retreat from love, but a higher way to love. A love that does not demand you lose yourself, but one that requires you find yourself first, and then bring that full, conscious self into union. Because a man who leads with reason, lives with virtue, and loves with discernment cannot be broken by emotion. He may be shaken, he may be tested, but he will not be consumed. And in that, he becomes not just a lover, but a leader, not just a partner, but a protector of truth, of integrity, of peace. And that is what Aristotle believed every man was meant to become. The world you live in today is not Athens. You don't wear a toga, and you're not debating ethics on marble steps. But the forces Aristotle warned about, emotional volatility, illusion, dependency, masked as love, are more alive than ever. In fact, they're now disguised in prettier forms: selfies, seduction, psychology, trauma, bonding, emotional projection dressed as vulnerability. So the question becomes, how does a man bring ancient reason into a hyper-emotional world? It starts not with rebellion, but with understanding. You don't need to fight women. You don't need to suppress them, but you do need to stop being confused by them. You need to stop expecting them to mirror your logic, your consistency, your clarity, because they won't. And that doesn't make them wrong, it just makes them different. The man who expects emotion to behave like logic is not rational, he's naive. So step one is this: don't expect her to be what she's not. Expect yourself to remain who you are. Her emotions are waves. You are the shore. She will rise, fall, change, contradict, demand. Your job is not to match her. Your job is to anchor. This doesn't mean being cold, it means being still. The second application is reclaiming emotional independence. If you need her to validate, you soothe, you complete you, you've already given her power over your mind. And once she senses that you're emotionally dependent on her approval, she no longer has to manipulate. She only has to withdraw. And you'll come running, you'll over-explain, over-give, apologize for breathing. That is not love, that is emotional slavery. You escape this not by withdrawing emotionally, but by building an inner life so rich that her emotions never become your compass, your discipline, your solitude, your physical strength, your mental clarity, your purpose. These are your stabilizers, and no woman, no matter how enchanting, should be able to reach inside you and rip those out. The third step is setting boundaries, not as a reaction, but as a principle. You don't wait until she disrespects you to define what's acceptable. You define it before the storm. That includes your time, your values, your mission, your emotional line. You do not let chaos train you. You train yourself to remain calm in its presence. This is what Aristotle would call phronesis in action, practical wisdom. the ability to apply timeless truth in the heat of modern emotion. And in this age, you need it more than ever, because you live in a culture that celebrates the feeling man, the open man, the man who emotes publicly and bleeds freely. But let's be honest, the man who bleeds without control is not admired, he's used. A woman may say she wants emotional openness, but if you spill too much too often without restraint, she will lose respect. So what do? You learn to feel without flooding. You own your pain without offloading it. You process your storms alone and then return to her whole. This doesn't make you distant, it makes you sovereign. And when you are sovereign, you can love without losing your edge. You can protect without sacrificing yourself. You can care without collapsing. Another way to apply Aristotle's wisdom is to redefine your value. Modern men are trained to think they are valuable only when they are chosen, when they are wanted by a beautiful woman, when they are called the one. But a man who waits for a woman to give him his worth is already disposable. Your value is not in being chosen. Your value is in choosing yourself first and choosing her only if she amplifies your strength, not pacifies your fear. Aristotle would say, don't chase beauty, cultivate character. Don't ask, does she like me? Ask, does she align with the man I'm becoming? That shift changes everything. Now love is no longer an escape. It is an extension of your wholeness. Lastly, learn to build stillness in chaos. This world is fast, reactive, volatile, and relationships are emotional terrain. The man who does not train his mind to be still in fire will panic, overcorrect, submit, or explode. But the man who brings logos into chaos, who remains calm when attacked, silent, when baited, firm when tested, is untouchable. He becomes what Aristotle meant by a man of virtue, one who is not perfect but proportioned, strong but kind, passionate but ordered, capable of love but never ruled by it. So if you want to apply Aristotle's wisdom today, understand her nature but don't collapse into it. Build your own frame and never abandon it to enter hers. Love with clarity, not just emotion. Make logic the lens through which all relationships must pass. And most of all, remember who you are even when she forgets who she is. That, my friend, is not just ancient philosophy. That is modern freedom. Aristotle never asked men to hate women. He asked them to understand them, and more importantly, to understand themselves. Because when a man loses his grip on reason, he doesn't just risk heartbreak. He risks losing the very core of his identity. You've seen it, maybe lived it. The man who bends, softens, surrenders. The man who once walked with purpose now waits for permission. The man who once led himself now follows emotions, not even his own. But there is a way back, a way not of war but of wisdom, not of distance but of discernment, not of dominance but of direction. When a man sees clearly, sees beauty, emotion, affection, and volatility without illusion, he is no longer a slave to love. He is sovereign within it, and that is what Aristotle was pointing toward all along. A man who rules himself so well that no one else can. So let this be your reminder. Love her, but lead yourself. Hear her, but trust your voice. See her emotions, but stand in your reason. Because in a world that constantly tells you to feel more, bend more, give more, sometimes the most radical thing you can do is think clearly. And when you do, you don't just become a better partner, you become a man the world cannot move. If this resonates with you, leave a comment below. Subscribe to continue receiving insightful, bold, and awakening videos about love, reason, and manhood. Share this video with a brother who is stuck between emotion and blindness